His wife humiliates him for being disabled at her birthday party. What he did next left her shattered. "Don't touch me. I'm not in the mood to play wife with a disabled man like you." Those were the devastating words Vanessa Brooks spoke to her husband at her birthday party, humiliating him in front of Austin's entire elite before dancing with her secret lover instead. She had no idea that the disabled man standing broken-hearted on that ballroom floor had already orchestrated the most brilliant legal chess move in divorce court history. What happened next will make you question everything you think you know about loyalty, trust, and revenge. Viewers, have you ever been publicly humiliated by someone you loved completely? How do you handle that kind of betrayal? Drop your thoughts in the comments. The chandeliers cast diamonds of light across the marble floor as Nathaniel Brooks adjusted his bow tie one final time. $90,000. That's what tonight had cost him. Every crystal glass, every white orchid, every note the 12-piece orchestra would play. But watching Vanessa glide through their guests in that emerald gown, her laughter echoing off the ballroom's gilded walls, he'd have spent twice that amount. "She looks radiant tonight," whispered Margaret Sinclair, wife of Austin's mayor, her champagne flute catching the light. "You're such a devoted husband, Nathaniel." Devoted. The word stuck in his chest like a splinter. 3 years since the accident that claimed his leg. 3 years of watching his wife's eyes grow colder each time his prosthetic clicked against their marble floors. But tonight would be different. Tonight he'd remind her why they'd fallen in love in the first place. The orchestra's conductor caught Nathaniel's eye and nodded. Time for the traditional dance. The moment every society party anticipated, when husband and wife would take center stage and remind everyone what true love looked like. Nathaniel began his approach across the crowded dance floor. Click step, click step. The sound of his prosthetic leg against marble had become as familiar as his own heartbeat, but tonight it felt amplified, echoing through the sudden quiet that fell over the ballroom. Vanessa stood near the champagne fountain, surrounded by her usual circle of admirers. Her perfectly sculpted face turned toward him, and for just a heartbeat, Nathaniel thought he saw something warm flicker in her dark eyes. Hope bloomed in his chest. "My darling," he said softly, extending his hand with the same gentle smile that had won her heart 15 years ago. "Our dance?" The microphone clipped to her dress, forgotten from her earlier thank you speech, caught her sharp intake of breath. Every guest heard her words. "Don't touch me," she said, lips curling. "I'm not in the mood to play wife with a disabled man like you." The words hit harder than the scaffolding that had crushed his leg. Champagne glasses froze mid-air. The orchestra faltered into silence, but Vanessa wasn't finished. She stepped backward, her heel clicking sharply against marble, and extended her hand toward Ryan Cole, the personal trainer who'd been circling her like a hungry wolf for months. 38 years old, muscles straining against his rented tuxedo and broke as a joke, but he had 2 working legs and abs that could grace magazine covers. "Ryan will dance with me instead," Vanessa announced, her voice still amplified by the forgotten microphone. "At least he won't slow me down." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Nervous, shocked, but laughter nonetheless. Rachel Green, Vanessa's so-called best friend, covered her mouth with her gloved hand, but her eyes sparkled with cruel delight. Judge Harold Whitman's wife shook her head in disgust, but didn't look away. The ballroom had become a gladiator arena, and Nathaniel was bleeding out in front of Austin's entire elite. Ryan stepped forward with the cocky grin of a man who'd just won a prize he'd been coveting. He wrapped his arms around Vanessa's waist and pulled her close. Too close, too intimate for any wife who still respected her marriage vows. The orchestra, uncertain and mortified, began a halting waltz. Vanessa and Ryan swayed together while 300 guests watched in fascinated horror. Her head fell back as she laughed, her fingers tracing the muscles of his shoulders while her husband stood frozen on the dance floor. Nathaniel's chest burned like someone had poured acid directly into his lungs. His hands trembled, not from weakness, but from rage so pure it threatened to consume him whole. The prosthetic leg that had carried him through 3 years of rehabilitation suddenly felt like an anchor dragging him toward the bottom of an ocean he'd never escape. But he didn't scream, didn't beg, didn't collapse. Instead, Nathaniel Brooks did something that would haunt Vanessa for the rest of her life. He smiled. Not the broken smile of a defeated man, but the cold, calculating smile of someone who'd just been handed the perfect weapon. He adjusted his platinum cufflinks with steady fingers, straightened his shoulders, and began walking toward the exit. Each click of his prosthetic against marble now sounded different, not like weakness, but like the ticking of a clock counting down to Judgment Day. "Enjoy the party, darling," he called back without turning around, his voice carrying just enough warmth to sound loving to anyone who wasn't listening carefully. The ballroom doors closed behind him with a whisper. On the drive home, Austin's neon lights blurred past the windshield. But Nathaniel's mind wasn't on the present. Memories surged, memories of what their marriage had once been. 10 years earlier, theirs had been a love story people envied. He was the ambitious developer, she, the radiant model. Their wedding had graced magazines, their laughter had filled penthouses and limousines. But life had tested them. 7 years ago, Vanessa's body betrayed her. Fibroids, failed treatments, and finally the unthinkable, a hysterectomy. The night before the surgery, she had sobbed in their bedroom. "I won't be a real woman anymore," she whispered. "You'll resent me. You'll find someone else." Nathaniel had dropped to his knees, holding her face. "Vanessa, you are not your womb. You are my wife. If it's just you and me against the world, that's enough." He stayed by her hospital bed, sleeping in a chair, holding her hand through recovery. He never once made her feel less. But 3 years ago, it was his turn to face tragedy. A scaffolding collapse crushed his leg. The surgery left him with an amputation. He endured months of rehab, learning to walk with a prosthetic. Vanessa visited at first, dressed impeccably even in hospital halls, but her eyes were distant. Where he had stood by her, she began shrinking from him. His limp embarrassed her. His prosthetic became the sound of shame in her ears. He tried harder. Lavish gifts, tender words, romantic gestures. But the marriage that had once been love became performance. And Vanessa stayed not out of devotion, but out of hunger for the Brooks name, the mansion, the status. On his father's advice, Nathaniel had long ago placed every asset into a family trust, an invisible fortress built 3 years before he even said, "I do." At the time, it felt excessive. Tonight, it felt prophetic. Now, as he drove through Austin, those years replayed with brutal clarity. He had given her loyalty when she lost her womb. She had given him humiliation when he lost his leg. His jaw tightened. Tonight, the scales would balance. Nathaniel's Bentley cut through Austin's midnight streets like a blade. His hands gripped the leather steering wheel so tight his knuckles had gone white, but his mind was ice-cold precision. The humiliation burned in his chest, but fury had crystallized into something far more dangerous, calculated vengeance. He pulled into the circular driveway of his Highland Lakes mansion and killed the engine. The house stood dark against the Texas sky, all glass and steel overlooking the water. 10,000 square feet of architectural perfection that he'd designed himself, built with his own money, his own vision. His phone buzzed as he climbed the front steps. A text from Vanessa. "Don't wait up. Celebrating with friends." Friends. He almost laughed. Inside his study, Nathaniel loosened his bow tie and called Michael Torres. "It's Nathaniel. I need every footage from the party tonight and follow my wife." Michael's gravelly voice showed no surprise at the midnight request. 25 years as a detective had taught him that the wealthy never slept when their worlds were crumbling. And in truth, Michael had already been quietly monitoring Vanessa for months at Nathaniel's request. The trainer had always been a shadow too close. Consider it done. The second call was to David Klein, his attorney. David answered on the first ring. Lawyers who handled 8-figure deals never really slept. "Nathaniel, what's wrong?" File for divorce first thing tomorrow morning. Silence stretched across the line. David had handled Nathaniel's business for 15 years, had seen him weather hostile takeovers and billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat. The cold fury in his voice now was something entirely new. What grounds? Adultery. Any prenup? Nathaniel's smile could have frozen blood. What prenup? We never signed one. More silence. Then David's sharp intake of breath as understanding dawned. The trust. Every asset moved into the Brooks family trust 3 years before our marriage. The prenup became irrelevant because there are no marital assets to split, just the trust, which she has no legal claim to. David's admiration was audible. You magnificent bastard. The third call was to his account manager to freeze every line of credit and account Vanessa had access to. The fourth call was to his housekeeper, Maria. Pack everything in the master closet that belongs to my wife. Every dress, every shoe, every piece of jewelry I ever bought her. Put it all in suitcases and leave them by the front gate. Sir? Tonight? Yes, tonight. His phone buzzed with incoming photos from Michael. Vanessa and Ryan entering the Driscoll Hotel. Vanessa and Ryan in the elevator. Vanessa's hand on Ryan's chest as they stumbled toward a suite. Vanessa kissing Ryan passionately. Vanessa woke to sunlight streaming through the Driscoll Hotel's silk curtains, Ryan's arm draped possessively across her waist. Last night's triumph still sang in her veins. The look on Nathaniel's face when she'd rejected him. The admiring gasps from the crowd as she danced with a real man instead of that limping shadow of her husband. She slipped from the bed and padded to the marble bathroom, admiring her reflection in the gilded mirror. At 37, she could still turn heads, could still make men like Ryan worship at her feet. Nathaniel's accident had stolen her prime years, chained her to a man who clicked and clunked across their marble floors like broken machinery. No more. Room service arrived with champagne and strawberries. Ryan fed her fruit with his fingers while she planned their future. Maybe Europe first. Paris, Monaco, places where old money and new flesh could play without judgment. The fantasy shattered at checkout. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Brooks," the desk clerk stammered, running Vanessa's Platinum American Express through the machine for the third time. "Your card's been declined." Heat flooded her cheeks. Behind her, other guests were starting to stare. Ryan shifted uncomfortably, his confident swagger evaporating as whispers filled the marble lobby. "Try this one." She thrust her Visa Black at the trembling clerk. Declined. The MasterCard. Declined. "There must be some mistake," she hissed, but her voice cracked on the words. What she didn't know, every card had been flagged for cancellation at midnight. A quiet instruction Nathaniel had given his banker weeks ago. The hotel manager appeared, his diplomatic smile failing to hide the calculation in his eyes. Rich wives who couldn't pay their bills were nothing new in his business. Panic clawed at her throat as she fumbled through her purse, pulling out a diamond tennis bracelet Nathaniel had given her for their anniversary. "I'll sell this, right here. Someone will buy it." The manager's smile turned pitying as he arranged the sale to a guest who offered half the bracelet's worth. Cash changed hands like a drug deal, while Austin's social media documented every humiliating second. The drive home passed in numb silence. Ryan stared out the passenger window, his jaw tight with the realization that his golden goose had just been slaughtered. Vanessa's hands shook on the steering wheel as her phone buzzed with notifications. Photos from the hotel lobby, videos of her selling jewelry like a desperate pawn shop customer. Her world tilted completely off its axis when she pulled into their driveway. Suitcases, dozens of them, lined up like soldiers along the wrought iron fence. Every Louis Vuitton bag she owned, every designer piece packed and waiting like discarded trash. "What the hell?" Ryan breathed. Vanessa stumbled from the car, her heels catching on gravel as she ran toward the front door. The key turned, but nothing happened. She tried again, twisting harder, panic making her clumsy. The locks had been changed. Footsteps echoed on marble behind the door. Nathaniel appeared in the entrance, immaculate in a fresh suit despite the early hour. His eyes held no warmth, no recognition of 10 years of marriage. He looked at her like she was a stranger who'd wandered onto his property. Looking for something? His voice was conversational, almost pleasant. You can't do this. This is my house too. Actually, no, it's not. He extended a manila envelope toward her like a peace offering. Read page 3. The property deed shows sole ownership under the Brooks family trust. You have no legal claim here. Vanessa tore open the envelope, her eyes scanning legal documents that might as well have been written in ancient Greek. But the header was clear enough. Petition for divorce. You're making a mistake, she whispered. Nathaniel's smile was winter frost. The only mistake was thinking you deserved better than you are. He stepped back and closed the door, leaving her standing among her packed possessions like a refugee in her own driveway. She screamed, "We will meet in court." 6 weeks later, Travis County Courthouse buzzed with anticipation. Word had spread through Austin's legal circles. Nathaniel Brooks versus his socialite wife in what promised to be the divorce of the decade. Reporters clustered outside, cameras ready to capture the destruction of a marriage that had once graced magazine covers. Vanessa swept into the courtroom wearing her last remaining designer suit, her chin raised in defiance despite living in a cramped downtown apartment since that humiliating morning. Beside her, Cynthia Alvarez radiated the predatory confidence that had made her Austin's most feared divorce attorney. 57 wins, 0 losses in high net worth cases. We'll take him for everything, Cynthia had promised during their first meeting. Disabled husband, public humiliation, clear emotional distress. The judge will award you at least half his empire. At the defendant's table, Nathaniel sat beside David Klein with the calm of a man attending a routine business meeting. His tailored charcoal suit cost more than most people's cars, and his prosthetic leg was barely visible beneath perfectly pressed wool. 3 months of preparation had led to this moment. Judge Harold Whitman entered with the stern bearing that had made him legendary in Texas family courts. 30 years on the bench, he'd seen every manipulation, every crocodile tear, every legal trick in the book. His reputation for cutting through emotional theatrics to focus on pure law had made him untouchable. Cynthia opened with theatrical flair, painting Vanessa as the victim of a controlling, vindictive husband who'd trapped her in a loveless marriage after his accident, made him bitter and cruel. She gestured to Vanessa's dabbed eyes, her trembling hands, her obvious distress at being forced to relive their marital trauma. Your Honor, my client endured years of emotional abandonment after her husband's disability changed their relationship dynamic. She deserves compensation for her suffering. Judge Whitman's expression remained granite. Present your asset documentation. That's when Cynthia's confidence began to crack. David Klein rose like an executioner approaching the scaffold, his briefcase containing documents that would rewrite the definition of legal warfare. Page after page of trust agreements, property deeds, corporate structures, all dated 5 years before the marriage imploded. Your Honor, every asset Mrs. Brooks claims as marital property was legally transferred to the Brooks family trust 3 years before their marriage. The trust's sole beneficiary is Mr. Brooks, with no provisions for spousal inheritance or division. The blood drained from Cynthia's face as she scanned the papers. Real estate holdings worth $200 million. Investment accounts totaling $50 million. Business interests valued at $300 million. All untouchable, legally protected behind trust walls her client had no power to breach. Objection, Cynthia snapped desperately. Surely the court can't accept a trust as untouchable without forensic review. Judge Whitman's gaze sliced her argument apart. Objection overruled. The documentation is clear, binding and executed prior to the marriage. Continue, Mr. Klein. 1 joint checking account. David continued smoothly. Balance at time of separation, $147.83. All other assets remain in individual or trust ownership. Cynthia's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. Then came the kill shot, Michael Torres's evidence. Video footage of their intimate moments, time-stamped and legally obtained. Furthermore, David said, his voice carrying the finality of a closing grave. "We present clear evidence of adultery, violating the moral clauses of any potential settlement agreement." Vanessa watched her future crumble to ash in real time as her attorney's legendary reputation died on the courtroom floor. Judge Whitman's gavel fell like thunder. Divorce granted to plaintiff. No alimony, no asset division. Case closed. The courtroom emptied around Vanessa like water draining from a broken vessel. Reporters rushed past her toward Nathaniel, their cameras flashing as he shook David Klein's hand with the satisfaction of a general who'd won an impossible war. She remained frozen in her chair, staring at the judge's bench where her future had just been obliterated with 3 sentences. Cynthia Alvarez packed her briefcase with trembling hands, her legendary reputation lying in smoking ruins around her Louboutin heels. "I'm sorry, Vanessa. I've never seen anything like this. The trust structure was bulletproof. What happens now?" Vanessa's voice barely registered above a whisper. "Now? You start over. With nothing." The words hit like physical blows. Start over. At 37. With no money, no home, no skills beyond looking beautiful and spending other people's fortunes. The modeling career she'd abandoned for marriage was a decade in her rearview mirror, her face already showing lines that photographers wouldn't airbrush away anymore. Outside the courthouse, Austin's social media vultures circled like sharks scenting blood. Phone cameras captured her stumbling down the granite steps, her designer suit, the last remnant of her former life. Now looking like an expensive costume on flirtation may feel like a game, but when played with the wrong heart, it becomes self-destruction. A patient man's silence can echo louder than rage. Do you think Nathaniel was too harsh with his revenge? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more interesting and true-to-life stories.